Hello and welcome to the PHP 101 series. In this video what we're going to do is start talking about object-oriented programming. So I want to give a brief introduction to what object-oriented programming is, what it isn't, and what it's useful for. And before we get going, what I would love for us all to do is take a deep breath, breathe in, breathe out, and I want everyone to say this with me. Object-oriented programming is not confusing. Object-oriented programming is not hard. I can learn object-oriented programming. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, I want you guys to really believe that. I think what happens is a lot of times because object-oriented programming isn't taught with beginner programming, people actually wait a while to learn it and they don't get a good beginner understanding of what it is, so their knowledge can't grow to a complete rounded set of knowledge. There's like gaps in it. So what I'd like to do is try to simplify object-oriented programming to a way that makes sense and an easy way for us to learn it. So what object-oriented programming is essentially is a way of programming where you take the data, you take some data, and you take the functions used to manipulate that data, and you package it all together in one, what we call an object. So an object is basically, if you think of it as kind of a container that holds all of its own attributes, or in this case properties. An object has properties and attributes about it, and then it has its own functionality, and it's all packaged together. So what's good about object-oriented programming is what you can do is create code that has data within it and all of its functions to manipulate, display, and do other things with that data, all wrapped up in one place, and you can store that into a variable, so like a single variable inside of memory, and you can access that later on and use the functions whenever you need to. And we're going to get into some really cool examples or basic examples that will demonstrate that. Another thing that's really cool about object-oriented programming is that an object or a class needs to have like a single responsibility. You'll get into trouble if you try to make an object do too much or do something that's not really pertaining to that object. And what's really cool if you do it correctly is you can take your classes that you write and you can just use those in all other programs, and since they're self-contained, they'll work wherever they go. Okay, so let's talk about some very basic concepts of object-oriented programming. And what a lot of people do when they try to explain what it is, they'll use a person, and they'll say an object is like a person, and they'll go on from there. But I think because people, although familiar, are so complex that that analogy breaks down pretty quick for me. It was hard for me to learn with that analogy. So I think I've thought of a new analogy that may be just the same, but it's easier for me to think about. And I want you to think of an object kind of like, say, a house. Now a house has all sorts of attributes about it. The house has a door, it has floors, it has walls, it might even have like the color of the door might be red, and another house, although it has a door, the color of that house's door might be green. And so those are called properties. Okay, so so the house would have properties about it. And those properties are stored data, like its address, its street address could be one of its properties. Another thing, maybe that the internal temperature of the house could be a property, and things like that. Now, houses also have functionality to them. For instance, you can heat a house, you can cool a house, you can, you can open doors and close doors, and you could turn on lights and turn off lights and things like that. And in that situation, those would be called methods. or the functionality would be methods. So let's kind of end it there with an introduction, and I wanted to make this introduction short and sweet. So in the next video, we're just going to dive in and learn how to start creating objects, and we're going to learn the very basics of what that means. But I just want you to understand just a couple things leaving this video. I just want to recap those. The first thing that I want you to understand is that you can think of an object just like an object in the real world. Objects, like whether they're a house or a person or whatever, they have properties about them. And a property is data that is about that object. And then they also have functionality, or they can manipulate the data in some way. A good example of that would be if I had my house object and I used a heat method and I wanted to raise 10 degrees, I could change the internal temperature or that property of the house by adding 10 degrees to it. And that would be using the heat method. And I'll kind of show you an example of that in code and how that works. But I just want you to understand the difference between properties and methods. And I really wanted you to understand that some benefits of object-oriented programming is that it can simplify your code and make it look really neat, so you can do a lot with a few lines. The other thing is that it makes your code really easy to reuse in other projects. So if you write what's called a class, and it's very useful, and if you do it correctly, you could just take that class and use it in all other projects or just the projects that need it. So it's a way to make your code portable, and then also it packages up data and methods to manipulate that data into one single place. Some things that are not so great about object-oriented programming are also some of the things that make it great. Let me give you an example. So if I had an object, actually I don't even want to tell you about it right now because I haven't explained enough about what object-oriented programming is, and we haven't got it going. So I don't want to tell you its downfalls just yet. I'll tell you that I absolutely love object-oriented programming. I do see where people come from who are saying it may not be the greatest thing in the world, but I disagree. I think it is awesome, and it's a great way to program, especially if you're programming a very large application that needs to be maintained for a very long time. Alright, with that guys, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction, and in the next video we're going to create our first object. Alright, well I'll see you there.